Hey friends, I'm Maxwell Freud, a queer Minneapolis-based board game designer and the host of Hatch This Way, a limited audio series where I chat with other queer folks in the tabletop industry to learn all about who they are and how they contribute to the hobby by being their authentic selves. Today, I am joined by my real-life friend, Nersi Nikakhtar. Nersi, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Tell me a little bit about how you're involved in your various roles in the tabletop industry.
Well, I on an official basis, I should I give name drops or anything? I do reference guides. Is sort of my main gig. I do a little bit of graphic design and reference guides. Mainly contracting with Stonemaier Games. So really any Stonemaier game that has a reference guide, I probably did it. Whether or not I remember to put my name on it is different. And then as a fun side hobby, I do video reviews of games, which is great because it's actually afforded me a good way to communicate with some designers and folks who like my work, and every once in a while ask me if I will help promote their content with a little video, because they're short, because that is also my attention span for videos. And so the idea is if I do it in 3 minutes, I got to get it done. So, and then I do some semi-official play testing as a lead play tester here and there for folks. Yep.
Cool.
That's mainly it.
I think it's worth noting that your day job is a doctor.
Yes.
So
yeah,
I find it weird that I feel like anyone in the healthcare industry I know has no life outside of work. And you
I still don't. I still don't. I'm just replacing it with board gaming.
Yeah.
No, I think a lot of people in healthcare find other things to get obsessed about, and so it seems to fit fairly well, actually. There's actually a tremendous amount of overlap. I'm always sort of surprised at the people at work who come up to me and say, I found your YouTube channel. And just that, I don't know, that always catches me off guard that they were even looking for reviews online, and then they found their way to me. So there's actually a fair amount of overlap. I teach at the medical school, and we have had many meetings derailed by talking about board games, actually, like quite a few.
I wish I had more meetings derailed talking about board games. We're getting there. It's a work in progress.
Yeah. Well, you can just slowly introduce people.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Tell me how you identify. What are all the unique ways you identify as a human being?
Oh my gosh. Weird. One part of it, so I grew up, actually was born in Iran and moved to the United States when I was really young. And so one part of my identity is being Persian, which is very confusing to people who are like, Persia's not a country. And I'm like, I know. But when I think about my family and my family's friends and people who came over at the time of the revolution, one of the things I've noticed is we all refer to ourselves as Persian, and I think it might have been a way that my family wanted to distinguish themselves from the Iran that existed after the Islamic Revolution. So there's that, which didn't really occur to me that it was that big a deal because I grew up in LA, and then I left LA, and now I am like one of the only ones ever around, and that is it stands out more, let's say. I identify as a gay man. So there is some interesting overlap with being gay and brown. So that is another show in and of itself, probably. What else? I don't know what kind of... I guess I identify as a doctor sometimes. Usually when people ask me why I'm giving them medical advice, I say, well, I identify as a doctor, so there you go.
I think all those things are worth discussing at least a little bit.
Go for it.
So talk to me about maybe just culturally, what was your journey like discovering you were gay and coming out to your family?
Oh gosh. I don't A lot of people describe having an epiphany moment, and I did not. I remember as a little kid, I had a crush on my camp counselor. His name was Joel. God, he's probably like 70 now. Anyway, if he's alive, I don't even know. Anyway, so going from that age on, I just remember at some point, I sort of became intrinsically aware that, I should probably not talk about it. I'm guessing it was probably around middle school because it really didn't come up until then. Middle school and then for sure high school. It was just not like nobody was out. And granted, this was still Southern California, but it was also, the 90s, early to mid 90s. So it was still like a thing that people talked about in theory, but not so much in practice. And then I left to go to college, and I thought to myself, okay, well, I in middle school and high school, I had this baggage of like coming out, and I have all of the people with whom I'd grown up, and it's going to be such a big deal, and you have to deal with their responses, but I've known you for so long, and yada yada. So I thought, all right, well, I'm going to go to college, and no one's going to know anything about me, except for I had one of my friends from high school was in college, and with me, or he was a year ahead of me, and I was like, okay, well, there's him, but there's like nobody else, so this is going to be a great time to do it. And I didn't, and I just remember my first year, months went by, and I had this sort of internal panic, like, okay, I'm running out of time. Now these people are starting to get to know me, and then I'm going to have to like deal with trying to redo their image of me, and I need to get this done. So in spring semester or spring term, I remember I was like, all right, I'm gonna come out to my close friends and then just kind of let it go from there. And I did that, and that was pretty good. I mean, the school really put the liberal in liberal arts, so like I wasn't intrinsically that worried about it, about their responses. They were generally speaking all very pleasant about it. There weren't that many out people, but everyone was like nice and supportive. And then I went back to my parents' home for the summer, and then it sort of felt weird again because I was not out to anybody. And then I kind of let it go. And then I think I had some like written correspondence or something that I'd left in my room that my mom found when I was back in school in the fall. And so she and my sister called and was like, hey, we found this. And they asked me about it. And so they basically asked me to come out to them on the phone. And I was like, okay, well, yes. And they said, hey, do you want us to tell your father? And my father, was fairly conservative, and he didn't want to leave Iran when he's kind of forced to and so forth. And I was like, no, do not, please. And I will bring it up to him in my time. And they said, okay. And then they called me an hour later and they said, well, we told your dad. And he doesn't really want to talk about it. And I was like, yeah, no kidding. And so that was a much longer process. I actually think the first time he really brought it up to me we were at the airport, and I was about to go to my flight to go back to med school. So this is a few years later, and he like brought it up. This is back when you could actually go to the gate. So this is pre 9/11. And they started boarding my flight, and they called my row, and that's when he brought it up. And I think he sort of probably had this panic of like, oh, I'm also running out of time, so it's my last moment. I'm gonna bring it up now. And I was like, I can't talk about this right now, but yeah, because he asked me if I was gay, and I said yeah, and he's like, okay. I was like, well, gotta go. It was this very awkward thing, and he eventually came around, but yeah. But that was sort of the last I had. He was the last person I ever had to worry about explicitly coming out to, where, when you sort of come out to people who've known you, you have to sort of, there's this part of you that's like, I've sort of been misrepresenting myself to you for a long time and I have to fix that now, versus everyone who came after that, like if I had to come out to them, it was their fault. Like they were just not paying attention. So that was sort of the last stop, and I didn't really have to worry about it in that explicit a way after that.
So what exactly was it that you were afraid of that your family or father would find out, and what was the reaction that you were trying to avoid? Or
that's a good question. I don't know if I had a very specific reaction. I wasn't particularly worried he was gonna. I was gonna say he's not gonna kick me out of the house, but I didn't live at home anymore, so whatever. And by that point, actually, I wasn't really reliant on them supporting me when I was in med school. I just was living off loans. I think it was just more that he was going to get upset or angry. I was generally someone who always did what was expected of me, and that was sort of a measure of success. So I think, a lot of times parents sort of grieve the loss of what they expected their children were going to do. And so I think that was going to be, that was, I guess, more my mother. I think my father just sort of, generally got upset and angry if he didn't get his way. And this would be him not getting his way. I mean, he was very much, when my sister was in college, he was very much of the idea that, young women shouldn't be out past 10 and shouldn't be talking to men and stuff. And like, she was, I don't know, she was like, just like 20. And he was still sort of stuck on that idea. And so I think I just didn't want to deal with his mood, I guess, with that. I don't know if I had a very, very specific fear. It's just kind of like, there's going to be conflict. And I know there's going to be some kind of conflict, and I just do not want to deal with it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I think after covering that, talk to me about what your experience has been. Like, why did you emphasize the being gay as a brown person? Like, what does that specifically mean to you?
I think there is, so when people talk about sort of being in a minority group, and when you're a minority within a minority, or that so-called intersectionality, it feels extra weird because, to really say, oh, here's someone who has my shared experience, there are just very few people who have like all of those things. I do think that certainly growing up, a lot of gay culture was very, white male, athletic focused. And that's kind of what people prized and continued to prize, a lot of times. I mean, if you just look at just how people are represented. So it was tough. One, just sort of feeling like I'm not going to be that thing that everyone wants, or I will be weirdly objectified and fetishized. Right? When someone asks you, "Oh, what are you?" and that's how they ask it, or, "Oh, your name is so interesting. Where's that from?" And like, I know where you're going with this. I don't know. There's seldom a good reason they're asking. If they're not really asking, like, hey, I want to understand your lived experience, it's when it's coming from that, I just need to put a label on you. I'm very suspicious of it, because I feel like, okay, that's just going to be necessary for them to apply a label, which would either, one, say, oh, I am not particularly into Middle Eastern guys, or, which is not cool, or, oh, I'm super into Middle Eastern guys. What about me changed knowing that fact? Like, does that weirdly make me less or more attractive or interesting to you? And either way, that's not a compliment. And so, I forget that people, especially now, since I'm not surrounded by a lot of Iranian people, and I just sort of feel like I blend into, if in my brain I blend into, I don't think I actually do, to the people around me. I forget that people still view me as being somewhat foreign, and it often catches me off guard when people say things to me to remind me of that, where I'll say something and it's like, oh, is that like a traditional thing that you do? I remember when my father passed away, for example, and my family didn't really get along. My dad in particular didn't really get along with anyone in the family, and certainly no one in my family has ever really had a funeral. At least not one that I'd been to, including my father. And so, my father passed away, and he was cremated, and they had moved out of Southern California, so he didn't really have a lot of local friends, but a couple of his local friends and my mom and my sister and we all went out to lunch, and that was kind of it. And so when people asked me, oh, when's your father's funeral? And I said, oh, he's not having one. The response was always something like, oh, is that a thing in your culture? I'm like, no, lots of people don't have funerals. And it's just that reminder that you're doing something, you're making a choice or doing something that I don't understand. And it's because I view you as inherently different. And that's the only way I know how to interpret your different decision is, oh, well, you're from a different culture, so that must be why, as opposed to, you know what, people just make different choices. And that kept catching me off guard. And I finally just kind of lost my patience, I think, like the 6th time I was asked that, and let that person know how I thought that was just not an okay way to interpret that. So I get that. Or, whatever, if you're somewhere and then someone comes up and hits on you and he's like, oh, you have this look that I really like. I'm just like, stop it. I don't want people to sort of build this idea and fill in the blanks based off of their assumptions on a particular label, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, or even the you're not from America, are you? And that one comes up a lot. And I was like, depending on how feisty I'm being, I will say, I'll politely disengage myself, or I will really challenge them on, tell me what an American versus a non-American looks like. And, that probably won't ever go well, but it sort of, in my mind, I'm like, darn it, I'm going to teach these people about what being, about understanding sort of the wide variety of the experience that is an American. But generally, they're not in the mental space to do that. But I try anyway. I don't know why. I just have this vague idea that I'm going to, on an individual level, open up people's minds.
Hey, I mean, most of those people probably don't have any friends of color, and probably for good reason.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe if you sort of are stuck with reducing people to tokenism, like you're not really going to have actual friends of color. And I just feel like that's the road that goes down. So yeah.
Is there, you kind of mentioned it, but is there like a preferred way you'd want someone to engage you in that conversation that's not offensive, that isn't, like, how would someone ideally bring that up in a conversation?
Well, I think the question really is asking people what their lived experience is, and not having to necessarily feel like you have to couch that in terms of it falling into particular categories, right? So I'm going to have a very different experience as an Iranian or a gay man than someone else. And so I think really the question is like trying to just ask about, what life was like, and not what like, so what does it mean to be, Iranian or gay or something? We want to shortcut people. And I think the trick is to just not do that. And then, inevitably, if you want to talk about what my life or experience is like, it's going to come up. It's not like these things aren't part of my identity. I will talk to you about how I was raised to be in the very Persian, aggressively polite kind of way, and I can't always stop myself from doing that, and that's just how I'm going to be. Or how my views of gender and gender roles have been informed by being a gay man. Like, that's just going to be part of it. So it's going to be part of my story no matter what. So the question really is just try to learn people's individual stories and the aspects of their background that will get woven in, because that just defines a lot of how we are.
Yeah. It's also one of those things I don't think people always have access or like ways to practice, just because, and I think it's not, sometimes it's a geographical thing. I think more often than not, it's just, I don't know. I mean, you have to be open to meeting people where they're at, and you have to seek out, I think, people who don't look exactly like you. It's kind of onus on everyone to, if you want to be more comfortable and not offend people of color, you probably have to be open to being corrected. And
I mean, even the people who do look like you, I don't think you can assume that they will necessarily have had the same experience as you. And I get that we want to shortcut it, but to truly understand something that is not your experience means that you have to put yourself out of your own experience, which means you're going to not necessarily really know what's going on, and you will make, incorrect assumptions, and that's just part of it, right? If you knew exactly what someone else's experience was going to be like, you didn't learn anything. And so you have to be wrong to learn something, or you have to, if not wrong, you have to at least just not know. And so, yeah, I think that coming from that place of just of open inquiry, like, I just really want to know about you. You will get there and you will mess it up and you will say people's names incorrectly and whatever. It's fine. And you just own it and learn from it. In general, I'm much, and this is a me thing, but I think it's a lot of people. I'm much more interested in people honestly wanting to know than I am with them necessarily being right in their behaviors. And so if someone really is like, I don't know what I'm doing or saying to you, but it's coming from an honest place, like, that is fine.
I think intention and impact are two words that are very common and been more common now that people are talking about racism and understanding lived experiences. And there's obviously a difference between impact and intention, but I think the intention always matters. Like, even if you don't have the intended impact, you can apologize. And I think the intention behind your question still, like you said, matters. If you're asking from a place to really understand me, that's different than asking me to know if I check a box on your wish list of
right
hookups.
I mean, yes, and I get that. I think people have to be careful about really understanding their intent, because I think a lot of people are comfortable just limiting things to their superficial understanding. Well, I didn't mean for that to be racist. Didn't you, though? I mean, you may not have come out of your mouth thinking, hey, I'm going to say something racist. But if you take enough steps back to how do I even have this language? Yeah, you actually probably did. And so I think people need to, when they're thinking about intent, if you're going to reflect on things at some point later, think about not just the proximal intent, but the ultimate intent. Like, how did I get to the point that I said that or I did that, even if that was not my intent in the short term, long term, was there some not great reason that intent was there, and maybe that's something I should examine. So I think, I don't know, I obviously spend a lot of time in my head and thinking about conversations. And so it's not realistic for me to expect that everyone will do that. But, if people have a moment in the capacity, I think sort of stopping and thinking how do I understand and perceive the world, and thinking about how they got there, I think would do the world a great service if people just did that a little bit more.
Shifting to board games a little bit, Do you see yourself in board games, or where do you see yourself in board games? Or
Well, I literally see myself in one board game because Viticulture has a card that has me on it.
Oh, really?
Yes. But that was back in the early Stonemaier games. Yes. So if you ever play Viticulture and you the Essential Edition, and you pull out the producer card, that's me. So that's where I see myself in board games. So probably not what you meant, though.
No, I think that's still a great example. I mean, you literally have representation of yourself in board games.
Yeah, it's a good
How many
too.
people can say that?
Depends.
White people.
It depends on if you're friends with board game designers, I suppose.
That's a good strategy. I guess that's the takeaway from this episode, is that if you want to be in the board game industry represented, you need to be friends with the designers.
Yes. I mean, yes. No, not really. I mean, I think in general, it's right. It's board games are a medium, and they're an entertainment medium, and people want to sometimes see an expression of themselves in any medium, right? Whether you're reading or whether you're hearing a song that describes how you're feeling, or whether you're seeing a movie that is about something that you've lived through. You don't want it all the time, because let's face it, some of the times we want entertainment so we don't have to deal with our lives and we can do something else. But I think at some point, most people will want to feel like they're seeing themselves in any form of medium.
So, of like 3 things that you mentioned you identify as,
Yeah.
how would you say you feel represented as a person of color, B, queer person, and then C, as a doctor?
In board games.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oof. Well, there are doctor board games. The doctor representation is mostly terrible. I don't think designers really know what doctors do.
I specifically asked that question because I know how strongly you feel about medical board games.
Well, it depends on the game, right? So I'm an internist, and like people have no idea what an internist. I remember I was actually walking through the demo hall at BGG Con, several years ago, and they had a demo of Heart Healthy Hospital. I had one of the cards out, and it was a card, I think it was Dr. Lee or something, and he was listed as an internist, and his special abilities, he got like a +1 in the operating room. And I was like, part of our identity is that we're not surgeons as internists, and that drove me crazy. I'm like, you couldn't just look up internist really quickly on Wikipedia before you did this? But that's okay. I don't really feel the need to be a doctor in board games, because part of, I think, what I like about things like board games and video games and so forth is that it's a chance for me to experience other parts of life that I'll never get to see. So I'm okay with a game that is not my job. Interestingly, there are not a lot of representations of Iranian experiences. There's a revolution, Iranian Islamic Revolution game that was at a very small print run. That was, I guess that's that. Otherwise, I'm like, I'm going to take the Persian culture in a Civ game. Yay. And that's about it. Although I kind of do tend to do that when I play Civ, just because why not? Because, we did have one of the great civilizations by some measure at some point. But like that's never there as well. I think the identity that I most probably want to see in board games is the queer identity, because I think that's just that feels like the most personal, in that it's something that is sort of core to, I think, a lot of my life and my relationships. And, might be also because I'm not around a lot of Iranian people, and I try not to necessarily hang out with a ton of people from work. But in the end, sort of being a gay man informs a lot of what I do in my social life. And so I think that's important, because, when you're playing a game and you are trying to insert yourself into it, if you're playing a game where you're like, this is going to be a board game representation of who I am as a person, some of the most important aspects of your identity, it would be nice for them to show up in it. And so I think you kind of want to see that on some level. And that's, generally speaking, not great. To be honest, it does not necessarily come up in a lot of games, but the games where your actual relationships with other human beings is part of it. And it can be something as, generic as like, do you get married in the game or something, to something very specific, like this game is about your relationship with another human. Like, for example, Fog of Love. Mm-hmm. Like that one, the whole game is about you being in a romantic relationship. So of course it matters in that. But, if I'm playing a Civ game. Like, I don't care. But yeah, if the game does have to do with like your interpersonal or social relationships, and the game is having you be you rather than a very specific character, but I would say even a specific character if you had that option, that's not great. I think it's gotten a little bit better. I think in a lot of ways the board gaming industry's some of the board gaming industry is trying to get better. Here's another sort of weird example. I think there's a lot more attention, for example, paid to people with varying abilities in board games. So mobility, color blindness. Actually, people are really paying, and I didn't really think too much about this until I had a person who was in a gaming group I was in who was colorblind, and I was way more conscious of it because I had to think, am I going to take this game and is he going to be able to play it? So I think people have gotten better about that, but it's still a lot of times so that mechanic stuff is fine. The stuff about queer identity and stuff, it doesn't feel like it's sort of built into the fabric of it yet. It feels like oftentimes it's still very much a specific choice or add-in that happens, or an option, and of course a lot of that even has to sort of get stuck in a gender binary, and that's not great. So say, well, if imagine you're playing the game of life and you take your little car and you could put two blue pegs in your car. Like,
we
cool.
Sure did.
Yeah, exactly. But it's still blue or pink, right? So it's better, and I think people are more conscious of it. I do appreciate seeing some companies really trying hard with it. Paizo's been really working with trying to have a more diverse character representation in their sort of iconic characters. I think Fantasy Flight has actually been working really hard. I think about even the latest Descent. There is a deaf character, there is a non-binary character, and that's cool. And I think they're particularly trying. And actually, the thing that I appreciate about that, it isn't like you can choose to make this character non-binary. Like, they just are, and they're a cool character, and you just got to kind of suck it up and deal with it, because you know what, world, the rest of us have had to deal with taking things that didn't necessarily represent us. And I think there is value in trying to interpret the world through the eyes of someone whose view is different, especially when that view is not the mainstream view. I'm not feeling like I'm sorely lacking in perspectives of the, dominant, white, hetero, cis viewpoint. I feel like I get enough of that. So if I'm going to seek out a viewpoint that's different from mine, it's probably going to be another underrepresented group, and I'm feeling good about that. But a lot of other ones really have to catch up, and I think it's especially hard for narrative-driven games, because then if that's sort of baked into the game, you have to figure out, all right, how am I going to put this into my particular narrative? So I think we're sort of at the very beginning of that. It's nice to be there, and it's nice to see the very beginning of it, and in some ways be able to talk to content producers and help them shape their philosophies. So it's actually an exciting time. So if that matters to you, I think it is really worthwhile to reach out to game designers and so forth and talk to them about how they can increase their representation, because this is sort of the moment where you can make that happen.
For sure. How did you get involved in the hobby initially? Like, what was your initial?
Oh my gosh, right.
Getting sucked in.
Good question. So I've actually thought about this a lot, because people ask me, and I'm like, I don't know. It's maybe the same sort of question when they say, when did you first realize you were gay? I'm like, I don't know. I'm gonna go back to Joel the camp counselor. Maybe. I remember when we came to the US, I learned how to play chess. I remember we were staying, my parents had friends, immigration lawyer and his wife, who housed us for a little while, and they taught me how to play chess. I remember it was in their basement in the Bronx. And so I guess that was my first board game. The first one I actually ever got was Hi Ho Cherry-O. I don't remember much about it, but as a kid, I played board games a lot. And my mom would occasionally buy me board games, and I didn't really have a ton of friends, shocker. And so I would devise these ways to play games, including chess, by myself. And I did that for a while, and then my parents remodeled the home when I was in 7th grade. And had a couple games I particularly loved. And so we had to basically take all of our belongings and throw them into this massive storage unit in the backyard. And that's where all my board games went. And I remember there was a couple games, this Fellowship of the Ring game in particular, that I really adored. And after a couple months of it being in the storage and us living in this apartment, I thought, gosh, I really want to go play that game. And so I, got the key to the storage unit or the module, and I went in there. I couldn't find it, and I would sort of rummage through it, and I couldn't find it. And my mom said, it's there. Just wait until we move back in. And we did, and it wasn't there, and someone had thrown it out. And that really upset me. And I didn't think about it at the time, but I actually just started to stop playing board games then. I think I was just sort of mad. But then, went on to high school and then college and was playing, on my Super Nintendo and then med school. And I just kind of forgot about it for a long time. And that memory of it actually sort of came back because I bought myself a copy of the anniversary edition of War of the Ring from Ares, when Ares redid it. And I was so excited about it. I was like, why am I so excited about this game? Oh, right, because this is essentially replacing that Fellowship of the Ring game that I lost as a kid. And then when I moved to Minneapolis, pretty soon after I moved here, a friend of a friend introduced me to some of his friends, and they like playing board games, and they were really into collectible card games, which I never got into. But we started playing, and I just remembered, oh yeah, I used to love this. And then, it kind of exploded after that when I sort of rediscovered it. And, I hit it right when the recent board gaming renaissance was in its early phases. So I went through all of the games that, we sort of snobbishly looked down on, oh, you're playing that game. But I went through all that back when they were cool. I just sort of dove headfirst into it, and I haven't really come up for air yet. And I think one of the things that I just have found, especially over the last several years, that's neat is that there aren't a lot of forms of entertainment where the content creators and the content consumers are so closely linked to one another. You can't go to a convention and sit down with Michael Bay and be like, what kind of explosion you should have in your next movie is this one. But you can do that with board game designers, and you can have conversations with them in person and online. And I think there's this great appeal that I like, is that it feels like you are very involved in it. And I think that's part of why I really have enjoyed doing things like, freelancing or reviewing and so forth, because these are all sort of extended forms of dialogue with the creators. And I think it's cool, going back to your earlier question, in a way you can see yourself in the games and the little impacts that you have here and there. And so I think that's part of what kind of keeps me in it, is feeling like this is something I'm not just passively absorbing. It's something that I'm in as well. I'm sort of in the midst of it.
What are some of the games that you enjoy the most?
Oh my gosh.
If you want to bring something to the table, you're going to have a good time, what are your go-tos?
Yeah. That's hard. It's like when people ask me, what's your favorite game? And I say, I don't know, what's your favorite song? And they say, I don't know, it depends. And I say, yeah, exactly. So
what would you say?
Thematically, I could give you.
Or would it be easier if I asked, what would you recommend someone who is just getting interested in games for the first time? What would be some options you'd throw out?
Gosh, are we specifically name dropping?
Games?
Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
I don't know, because I find it hard. I think there are there are the kinds of games that I try to use to introduce people to particular mechanics and get them interested in the hobby. And there is the kind of games that I will play with people who are more familiar with it. Like, so for example, I was at the game store, and there were these couple people walking around, and I think they were talking about Ticket to Ride. Now, how much do I like Ticket to Ride? Which is a good starter, figure out route building style of game. And how much they wanted to get some new maps for Ticket to Ride. And then they stopped by Terra Mystica, and one of them grabbed it and said, "This game looks cool." And I really wanted to just go over there and say, no, I don't think you should play this, because I'm worried what's going to happen is you are going to get, it is not a great rule book. At least it wasn't. Actually, in fact, one of the earliest game guides I ever created was for Terra Mystica, because I was so frustrated with the rule book, I just made one. And I don't want people to get frustrated by a game because then they sort of revert to, well, board games are too obscure or hard, and I don't want to deal with that. Anyway, I was going to, but then they put it back and walked away, and I thought, good choice. That's something you got to work your way up to. So, given that, I don't know, my tastes are always changing. I feel like you want me to say specific names of things.
I mean, you don't. I feel like, based on what I know about you, is that you really enjoy. I feel like you get very excited about narrative and campaign style games. I think you really enjoy characters and story.
It's true. I mean, it depends. I think I do enjoy a game that feels like I'm doing whatever it is I'm supposed to be doing in the game, right? Like, hey, it's fine if I'm pushing around a bunch of cubes and discs and I've rebuilt some medieval city again, like that's fine. But if the game actually makes me feel like I'm really understanding what it's like to, I don't know, mine for coal or something, I appreciate that, because that's part of the reason I'm getting into it. Campaign games are hard because you really have to have a group of stable friends who are invested in it, and that's sort of hard to come by. But that said, I do love games where you get to see something build and grow. So engine builders. I remember actually my friend introduced me to Agricola, and he's like, "Oh, we should play this game, but it looks really hard to understand, and I don't know, we should just try it and see if we can figure it out." And he hated it, and I loved it because you start that game and you're at the beginning of it, you're like, how on earth am I going to get this anything built? Because it seems like all I'm ever trying to do is not starve, which is, I think, one of the complaints about the game. But also, you know what, when you're farming in 1600s, that's what you're doing. And then by the end of it, you have this great farm engine, and your fields are full of sheep and wheat, and you're like, look at this cool thing I made. And one of the things I just always like taking a picture of my board at the end of Agricola, because there's a sense of look at this thing I made. That's that's kind of part of the appeal for a lot of engine building things, even with Terraforming Mars, which is also one where people can get really overwhelmed, but it's gotten a lot of hype, so a lot of people get on it. It's at the end of it, part of the appeal is look at this planet we built. And so I appreciate that. So that's one way sort of narrative comes across. I actually do, depending on the group, I also really value cooperative games, especially when you're bringing in new people, because when you're playing a competitive game with new people and you're trying to teach it, because I do love teaching games. I teach as part of my job, and it's fun. And so I like doing it as a hobby as well. And it's can be tricky to teach someone a competitive game, especially if there's hidden information and they say, "Oh, I don't know what to do on my turn," and you say, "Can I see your cards?" and they say no, and then you're like, "Well, I don't know what to tell you." Versus cooperative games, it's a lot easier to teach them because, generally speaking, a lot of the information is open. And there are some people who are just not great when they lose. And so it's a little bit of an easier one. One of my favorite cooperative games is Spirit Island. These are all games that are actually more complicated that I'm going to keep mentioning, but Spirit Island I love because the mixing and matching of all of the components. That game has so many different ways you can set it up. Really creates a different experience. and it's cooperative in that you can talk with each other, but everyone has enough to deal with that it doesn't have that alpha player problem. Like, when you play Pandemic and there's that one person who's like, no, on your turn you go here and clear this, and then you go and do this and give me this card, and then in my turn I can cure it. All right, everyone go. And you're like, I'm just going through the actions that you are programming, and that's not very fun. But Spirit Island, like, there's just no way you can do that, and everyone has a bunch of robust decisions that they have to make on their own. That I love that one. Even actually, the one of the games I played a ton the last couple of years is The Crew, which, cooperative trick taking, and you're like, why didn't I? It's one of those like, why didn't I think of this games? And I normally hate trick taking games. I hate trick taking. I hate card counting. I don't like games that require that you do that. But that game just sort of works because there is an element of trying to understand the people with whom you're playing. Like, they played this card, and can I understand what their intent was? And I find that sort of appealing as a way to just kind of get to know people as well.
Yeah, I tried. It was right after restrictions were kind of lifting. We went and hung out with some friends, like for the first time in year and a half or whatever. And I brought The Crew and I brought The Mind as like two options we could play. And it was not a great idea because we hadn't had people contact for so long that we wanted to talk. So bringing two limited communication games, so like for The Crew, you can talk, but you're not supposed to reveal a lot of information.
Right.
Like, you use a clue token to indicate certain things.
Yep.
And so I was like, the game did not work.
Oh.
Because we just wanted to talk. I'm like, the whole point of it is that you have to do it in silence. Like, you have to like feel the tempo.
Yeah.
At which people play, and we just like, it wasn't happening. And I was like, this was limit. I love both those games in theory, but I'm like, you have to do it when everyone's like comfortable. You don't want to talk. Like, you need to focus together in silence.
Yeah. I do have a couple friends who introduced me to The Crew, and they're a married couple, and oh my gosh, they bicker with one another because they feel like, the other person made a really poor choice, and how do you not know what I mean by this, and so forth. And so that's also sometimes not great, and I have to sort of warn them, hey, you know what? And so, because the game like takes 3 minutes per round, so like, you know what? It's okay. Let me just shuffle the cards and let's just play again.
Yeah, I was terrible at The Crew.
It's hard for me to say what my overall. I can think of some overall favorites. Like, I think Brass is a brilliant game, but that's also a really heavy game to get into. One of my more recent games that I really love is Maracaibo, which is, I think, super cool because it is it's an Alexander Pfister game, and he loves rondel mechanics, and it has one, but it actually makes sense. Instead of like having some abstract thing, you're like doing a circuit around the Caribbean Isles. And I think what's cool about it is that there actually is a campaign and a narrative to it, which is really unusual in a Euro style game. And this game is like heavy Euro. There are, how do you know something has Euro? Because there are wooden discs in it. And this game has a ton of wooden discs. But that, I think, was such a cool idea, in that the game board has these overlays and these extra cards that you put in that sort of changes what's happening. And I think that was really fun. And a new idea, and I would love to see that happen with other games. So anyway, so instead I just try to satisfy myself when people say, like, what is your favorite game? I say, you know what, I just make a top 10 of the year list. I've been doing it for the past 4 years, so just take a look at that, and that'll be my favorite games from last year, and that can at least kind of get that conversation going.
All right, well, I appreciate all that. How can people support you, follow you, learn more about you? If you are, one of the things I love about board gaming is just there's a lot of dialogue around it, and I just sort of like being part of that dialogue. So it's one of the things I really enjoy is, for example, chatting with people on Instagram. Board gaming community they're super wonderful. So I usually am on there at DERNERSI, Dr. Nersi. And then Nersi Games is the YouTube channel. And
again, it's not like it's a hobby project, but I just really love it when people respond and say, here's what I thought of this, or what do you think about this? Because I think the point of it is to actually create some kind of dialogue. And if you ever come across me I try to go to 1 or 2 board game conventions every year, and I usually am in it to try to like meet new people. So if anyone is at a convention and they feel like talking about games would be cool, I will obviously do that unendingly.
Well, as always, I had a great time talking to you.
Likewise.
We're going to keep talking after this.
We're gonna keep
they don't know that, but we're going to play games.
We're going to play so many games.
A little disclaimer here at the end, and it's just that I want to remind everyone that we're just 2 queer folks, and we do not speak for the entire LGBTQIA plus community, nor are we trying to. The best way to be an ally is to keep learning, listening, and just remember that we're all trying to figure this out together. So that's all I have. Thank you so much for listening, and know that you're loved and perfect just the way you are. Until next time, that's all I got.
Later.
Bye.
Bye.